just ribbit along and make life be okay. But then, someone started dumping pollution into Mrs. Frog's stream. And it ran down into her pond. And it's hard to catch flies when you're coughing all the time. So Mrs. Frog said to Mr. Human, are you aware that you are hurting me and my little tadpoles are having trouble? And Mr. Human didn't really care. He had a business to run, and don't you know we have to keep the economy going? And Mrs. Frog did not know what an economy was. She was just frustrated about her pond, but what could she do? So then Mr. Human started to build a dam. You know what a dam is? So you stop the water. It's like a wall of water. And the pond started to dry up. Mrs. Frog was really upset. Mr. Human, what are you doing? This is terrible. But Mr. Human didn't really care. His dam made money, and he just kept telling everyone in the forest that crawdads were going to come and get him, and the dam would just keep those crawdads away. And even though Mrs. Frog knew that crawdads were just there to keep the stream clean and to cut the little algae everywhere with their pinchers, it didn't matter. Mr. Human just kept building his dam and saying things that made people think he doesn't like crawdads, does he? But as the pond dried up, you know what happened to Mrs. Frog? It got worse. A fox came and started to eat her friends. Eat a frog here, eat a frog there, eat a bird there. And even when they went to frog church, Fox was eating the frogs. And she was so mad and she was so sad. Mr. Fox, why would you do that? But Mr. Fox just blamed the black bear and blamed the she-bear. But Mr. Fox, you're not telling the truth. And it didn't matter. It was easy to be scared of big bad bears, and some of the animals liked being scared more than they liked the truth. So one day, Mrs. Deer came to get a drink. And aren't deer nice? Aren't they gentle? Oh, they are. Mrs. Deer came to get a drink, and even though the pond was polluted and low, and there weren't many frogs left, Mrs. Frog asked her, aren't you sad about this, the stream being all ruined? Aren't you mad at Mr. Human about what's happening to the stream? But Mr. Deer said, oh dear, bless your heart, it's not that bad. She was always such a simple deer. She said, maybe you should stop complaining so much about what Mr. Human does, because it really divides the forest. Or maybe you should just come and live on land, because we have trees and grass and berries. But frogs don't eat trees and grass and berries. And she was just pointing out how Mr. Human was hurting people. And obviously, Mr. Deer didn't understand what it was like to be a threatened little frog. Oh, Miss Frog, she said, you think you have it so bad. When I started seeing more hunters, I just got guns myself, and that works really well. And Mrs. Frog thought, good grief. So Mrs. Deer drank her water and bounded away and said, Mrs. Frog, I'll pray for you. And she ran away. Eventually, I don't know how it happened in the choking stream. I don't know how it happened in a dried up pond. But you know what showed up? A fish. I told you it was a story of a fish. Fish showed up. You know how fish are shaped? Kind of like this and like that. Yeah, I've seen fish like that. And Mr. Fish came to Mrs. Frog and said, it sounds like you're really hurting. It sounds like your life is really hard. And she was. She was an old frog at the end of her frog life and feeling alone and feeling sad. And Mr. Fish said, I'm really sorry. Is there anything I can do? There wasn't much he could do. He couldn't make Mrs. Frog's life last longer. And it was hard to make Mrs. Deer care. And it was even harder to make Mr. Fox tell the truth. And it was almost impossible to get Mr. Human to do the right thing. So Mr. Fish decided, when there isn't much else to do for Mrs. Frog, he would just stay with her. He would just be her friend. He would listen, he would comfort her. And she said, but Mr. Fish, if you stay here, you might die because the pond's getting low. And he smiled a little fish smile, which is really hard to do when you curl up your lips and try to smile at the same time. And he said, that's okay. I came here to be with you, and I won't leave you. I won't leave you no matter how low the water gets. I won't leave you no matter how dangerous the stream gets. I won't leave you even after you go to froggy heaven. And that made Mrs. Frog very happy to have such a loving fish as her friend. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. All right, you get to hang out with Miss Sarah back in